Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll just wait a bit more for everyone to stream in to the virtual session before we start. All right. Okay, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for taking time off today to join us for this webinar. All right, starting or managing a business is never a breeze. It is not just about a great business idea, but the various practicalities of running a business, such as funding the idea, developing an understanding of the regulatory framework, or even an operating space to run the venture to begin with. If you are facing such challenges in your business, help is here for you today. In this session, we're very happy to have with us the Pro Enterprise Panel Team, PEP in short, an arm of the Singapore Ministry of Trade and Industry, to tell us how our government is supporting new medtech companies to overcome these roadblocks. I would therefore like to welcome Ms. Rachel Chan, Assistant Director, Enterprise Development Division, Ms. Dana He, Senior Assistant Director, Enterprise Development Division, Ministry of Trade and Industry, and Mr. Julian Artope, Founder and CEO of Zenyum, to hear more about the PEP program and how it may help you in relevant areas of your businesses. Do feel free to post your questions through the session in the chat box, and I'll try my best to facilitate them. After the sharing session, we will open up as well for a Q&A segment. So over to Ms. He, Ms. Chan, and Mr. Artope. Good afternoon to all of you. Would you like to take us through what you have in store for our audience this afternoon?
Thank you very much, Christine, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Rachel and I are very happy to be here today to share more about the Pro Enterprise Panel, or PEP for short, and what we do. I hope all of you had the opportunity to scan the QR code that you see on the screen right now to participate in a poll, because I'll start my presentation with sharing of the results of the poll today. So I'll probably give another 30 seconds for more of the results to come in. Thank you, everyone, for taking part in our poll. As we can see over here, quite a few of you actually voted for cutting of red tape. That's your perception of what the PEP does. A significant portion of you voted for a bridge between private and public sector, and also a significant number of you voted for supporting innovation. Well, actually, all of you are actually right. So in our various engagements with the different trade associations and chambers and with businesses, we've been called many things. A shark tank, middleman between public and private sector, cutting red tape, sandboxing of ideas, supporting innovation only. So there are some truth and there are some false perceptions over here. To better share with you today what is the Pro Enterprise Panel about, the PEP is actually headed by the head of the civil service and comprises a group of senior public officers, for example, the Chief Executive Officer of SFA and ESG, and also senior business leaders, for example, senior management from OCBC, ST Engineering Electronics, Greenpack, and these are leaders who are all very passionate about enabling businesses in Singapore. The work and initiatives of the PEP is supported by the Secretariat officers like Rachel and myself. What we do very specifically is to ensure that the regulatory environment in Singapore is supportive for businesses to start, to thrive, and finally, of course, internationalize and venture beyond our shores. What we do not provide is financial assistance and grants, nor do we provide consultation services for business opportunities. We do have a dedicated agency, which is ESG, who is able to provide that area of support. Why does PEP do the work that we do? The PEP aims to act as a bridge between the private and public sector to facilitate innovation or novel proposals, novel business proposals, without compromising on key safety considerations of regulators, which are usually set out in regulations or different acts. In an increasingly volatile and uncertain world, the PEP helps to develop a regulatory environment for businesses with businesses in Singapore. In terms of how we are able to support businesses, there are three mechanisms. First is the first mover framework. Secondly, the new idea scheme. And thirdly, the PEP clinics. I won't actually go into detail in this particular slide. I'll share more in the upcoming slides. In the earlier slide, you have heard me speak repeatedly about innovation and novel proposals. How then exactly does the PEP assess whether a proposal is novel, whether it's innovative? There are four considerations that we have. First and foremost, the idea that's suggested must be a new idea that hasn't been seen or implemented in Singapore before. Secondly, even if a particular idea that's being proposed to the PEP has already been done in Singapore, as long as it's in a substantially different form, mode, or operating or business model, it's something that we can consider. So to better illustrate this point, I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the concept of dining at hawker center and food court. So what we will evaluate as a novel but different way of selling hawker fare would be vending machines that's selling your hor fun and your chili crabs. So that's how we define a substantially different operating or business model. The third factor to consider is that the business proposal supports productivity and is in an area of economic growth potential. MedTech, definitely one of the areas of high growth that we are expecting over the next 3 to 5 years. The other sectors will, of course, include agri-tech, Internet of Things, and sustainability. The fourth factor to consider is that the idea has not been actively considered or tabled for discussion with the different relevant public agencies in the 12 months prior. I will need to caveat that this timeline of 12 months is not a rule set in stone. It's more of a guideline. We will encourage the agencies to exercise discretion on a case-by-case basis. Of course, the more innovative a certain proposal is, the more we will exercise that discretion. So do allow me to move on to the first of the three support mechanisms that I'll be sharing in the presentation today. First and foremost is the first mover framework, or FMF for short. It looks at the direct allocation of public assets. In short, what it aims to do is to give entrepreneurs or businesses a head start in the use of public assets in order to try out their business ideas. For those of you who are not familiar with how land agency work, when leasing out a particular plot of land or a space, businesses usually have to go through a tender process. With every tender process, there is that manpower, that money, the resources that needs to be invested and expended. By going through a direct allocation approach under the support of FMF, we are hoping to give a direct allocation of a space for short-term use, as short as a few months, to even longer, say 6 years on a 3 + 3 years basis. I will have to highlight that whether or not a company is supported under the FMF will be subjected to the land agency's assessment, and also what their land development plans for that particular plot of land will be. To better illustrate how FMF work, I've got two case studies. First and foremost is the 24/7 unmanned container gym for residents. The idea is to have as the name suggests, a 24/7 pay-per-use unmanned container gyms in HDB estates and parks. So users will book the specific time slot where they want to use the gym and to work out for specific pods. When the business came to us, the challenge was to find a suitable and safe location to set up all these Gymports, because at the end of the day, they're unmanned. So there is that security concern. The agencies involved in the discussions, numerous: HDB, MParks, BCA, LTA, NEA, PUB, SCDF, URA, a whole alphabet soup. So when the proposal was placed before us, we had a few considerations. The key ones being, has this idea been implemented in Singapore before? What were some of the social and economic benefits that will arise from this idea? And when we brought this proposal to the relevant agencies, clearly the different agencies having their own agenda would have different concerns. So for example, HDB, which grassroots leader would actually support this proposition? How will the utility needs be met if it's placed at different locations? For MParks, does it add to the vibrancy of the park and the purpose of the park? For NEA, does it cause a disturbance to the community? And for SCDF and BCA, clearly their interest then would be on the building integrity as well as fire safety. So there was quite a bit of discussion between the business as well as the different agencies, but it was a positive outcome at the end of the day. MParks was very supportive of Gymport and had a pilot trial of 2+3 sites. And because of the success of the pilot, today Gymport has over 15 ports, including spin classes in different parts of Singapore. The second case study I'd like to share is the shipping container hotel. Again, as the name suggests, the idea is about recycling shipping containers, retrofitting them as hotel ports, which is very in line with the rising sustainability trend. The business challenge when the business came to us was to find a suitable space to trial the concept, and they were also wondering whether they would be subjected to the hotel licensing, given that they intend to have more than 2 rooms. So the agencies involved in the discussion were SLA, SDC, which is Sentosa Development Corp, JTC, and STB. So again, some of the considerations that PEP had: has this idea been implemented in Singapore before? Or rather, has this idea been implemented in a different overseas? Was it successful overseas? Do we have a benchmark overseas? And does this also increase the vibrancy of Singapore's domestic tourism offering? So when we consulted STB, who oversees the Orchard Road area, which was the original plot of land that the shipping container hotel was after, there were considerations whether this project would actually affect any of the development plans, for example, MCC-wise development plans for the area. And because of certain concerns raised on the initial proposal, PEP actually took the initiative to approach Sentosa as well as JTC as an alternative. And as an outcome, JTC offered shipping container hotel a 2+1 tenor at the JTC launchpad. And after the trial, because of the success, as shipping container hotel is starting to have more of these container hotels in different locations in Singapore. The second framework, the second scheme I'd like to share more about is the New Idea Scheme, or NIS for short. It aims to accelerate and standardize new business ideas via a regulatory sandbox mechanisms for businesses. For those of you who are not familiar with this concept on regulatory sandbox, it's essentially an exercise whereby a very specific regulation or an act is identified to be revised for a very limited period of time. And when I say revised, it may either be relaxed or tightened. And with that, the legal obligations that usually go along with the regulations or act will also be suspended for that limited period of time. The revised regulation or act is then tried out by a very specific group of businesses. So there are 2 possible outcomes for regulatory sandboxes. First and foremost, one possible outcome would be that the regulation for the entire industry may then be reviewed by the regulator, or an exception may be made for that particular business who surfaced that proposal with precautions and deliverables to be achieved and set by the regulating agency. So I have 2 case studies to share to better illustrate how the NIS work. The first example is Drivel. The idea is a peer-to-peer or P2P car sharing model where individual car owners who don't need their cars are allowed to actually rent out their cars to other users who need it periodically. And this service is administered via the Drivel app. The business challenge that was faced is that under LTA's private car rental scheme, or PCRS for short, private car owners are only allowed to rent out their cars on weekends or public holidays. So we kick-started that conversation with the relevant agencies, which was MOT and LTA. Some of the considerations that the PEP assess the proposal, first and foremost, has this idea been implemented in Singapore, or has this been proven successful in other countries? So to give a little bit more background, Drivel is actually an Australian concept. It was rather successful in Australia before it came to Singapore. So in that aspect, PEP had a benchmark or a case study overseas to evaluate the merits of the proposal on. So other considerations that the PEP had were any of the issues that are being faced in Singapore, were they able to be resolved through this Drivel proposal? How do we actually bridge the regulators' concern and the need for innovation? So when we spoke to LTA and MOT, there were quite a few concerns that they had. First and foremost, how to avoid signaling to private car owners that their cars can be monetized. Secondly, does this actually help the congestion issue that is being faced in Singapore right now? Thirdly, will this induce unnecessary competition to car rental companies and services in Singapore? And fourthly, how does this adversely impact the cost of cars and the COE prices? There was actually quite a bit extended period of discussion between the agencies and Drivel, but again, we had a positive outcome. Drivel was awarded a 6 months regulatory sandbox with the option to extend this sandbox by another 6 months. The initial fleet that was tested out was 500 cars, and because of there was some success achieved in the first phase, this number, the fleet, has been increased to 800 recently. The second case study I would like to share is a little bit more relevant to the members of APEC-MED. It's the use of vending machines to dispense healthcare products. The idea, as the name suggests, is to develop a vending machine for the sale of general sale list medicines or product, or GSL for short. So for those of you who are not familiar, this will include products like eye drops and bandages, and also pharmacy-only medicine, or PMED, and to actually have these vending machines at your HDB estates. So the business challenge is that the dispensation of PMEDs actually require the supervision of a pharmacist. And the regulations back then stated that pharmacies can only be tagged to one location. And that proves to be a problem, especially if you're going to have multiple vending machines across the island. So we started the conversation with HSA and HDB. Some of the considerations that PEP had were, again, has this idea been implemented in Singapore? Does this resolve any of the issues faced in Singapore? And because this is about medication, how then do we balance the need to safeguard public safety while engendering innovation? So for HSA and HDB, HSA actually had no regulatory issues for GSL therapeutic products via automatic vending machines. However, for the sale of PMEDs, HSA shared that the pharmacist in charge is required to ensure that there's proper professional oversight and service for every licensed pharmacy outlet. However, in our discussions, they were willing to actually do a sandbox and to actually try out this idea for a limited period of time. HDB also provided guidelines on the selection of the trial locations, and as an outcome of all these conversations, the idea was allowed to be implemented in various locations in Singapore for a limited time. The third and the last mechanism that I would like to share on is our PEP Clinics. This is a very industry-focused platform intended to help businesses and regulatory agencies diagnose the issues that businesses are facing and potentially come up with a solution for the businesses. This is especially appropriate for businesses who are unsure of what regulatory agencies to approach or to clear for their business proposal. So what the PEP will do would be, first and foremost, to understand what is the business proposal or issue on hand, and then invite the relevant agencies to come in to hear and diagnose the various regulatory touch points during the clinic session, and provide that advice or assistance to the businesses. So the typical clinic will last 2 hours long, but usually within this 2-hour period, just 1 hour will be allocated to each of the businesses to have that discussion, that conversation with the government agencies. We would like to highlight that this clinic is not meant to be a cure-all. It's not intended for a solution to be developed within that 1 hour consultation period. This is meant to be a stepping stone, a starting point for the business and the regulatory agency to get to know one another, to do a preliminary diagnosis, and then carry on that conversation after the clinic session. So I've come to the last slide of my presentation, and I'd like to hand the floor over to our guest speaker today, Julian from Zenyum. But before I hand the floor over to Julian, can I also invite all of you to scan the QR code that you see on the screen over here to take part in our next activity. And you can do this while listening to Julian. It's just going to take you less than a minute to do so. So Julian, over to you to share more about your company and your experience working with PEP.
Thanks so much, Dana. I was really smiling when I just saw the Gymports there, because Zenyum in the beginning was based in JTC, and I've used that Gymport actually quite a couple of times. It's a really great idea that you guys facilitated there. I think I want to give a very short introduction to Zenyum and then rather talk a little bit about how PEP has helped us very much in the beginning, and be able to give some advice to other budding entrepreneurs, how they can make use of the PEP and especially the PEP clinics. So Zenyum is distributing 3D printed invisible braces. And when we launched the company back in 2018, you know, we saw a technology that we were very excited about. My personal background is I've always been a founder, but I come rather from the software and from the marketing space. So I worked in e-commerce, I worked in classifieds previously, and accordingly, I was not very well versed in navigating a regulated landscape as with medical devices. But obviously, what we are doing is affecting people's appearance in a lasting way. And so one of the first steps before we even incorporated the company was to try to get a lay of the land of the regulatory environment in Singapore. And something that we learned is back in 2018, again, invisible braces were still fairly new. And so even figuring out how they were classified, is it a custom-made orthodontic device? Is it a class A medical device? Was not always very clear. And luckily, we had our little office at JTC Launchpad. And one of those days, we saw an invitation to a pro enterprise clinic. And this is where we went and where we said, hey, we have this idea and we would like to get a little bit more advice on how we should structure the company to be fully compliant and adherent to local regulations, but also potentially to even learn about how does it look like for the broader Asian landscape? Because as of today, Zenyum is active in 7 markets all over Southeast Asia. We have around 250 staff, and we've raised close to $60 million US. So what helped us a lot in that fateful first meeting, and something that for me was very, very surprising as a German, was kind of the speed of the replies that we were getting. You know, I come from an environment where in Germany, if you reach out to administration within the government, you can wait for, you have reply times of at least 6 to 9 months before you hear anything back. And what was really great for us back then is that all of our requests were answered within 24 to 48 hours. Somebody always got back to us, even if there was not immediately a solution. There was always somebody kind of getting back and saying, hey, let me figure out how we can set this up and how we can help you further. And so we kicked this off with one of these pro enterprise clinics, and I would highly recommend that to anyone that even thinks that they might be in a slightly regulated sector, because what will happen to you is you might think, okay, maybe only the MOH is responsible for me in this, or maybe only that department is responsible. But what the PEP really helps you to lay out are all of the different agencies, all of the different regulations that you might be in touch with. And so for us, this really was a great scoping session together with the Ministry of Health, together with people from the HSA as well, that laid out all of the potential regulation that we would need to be abreast of when we were considering launching Zenyum back in the day. That had to do with simple things like getting the right licenses for the invisible braces, up to how are we thinking about the Zenyum app, which helps customers to adhere to wearing their braces correctly. And so I think the biggest learning for me was, usually when you, as a founder, you want to move fast, and as a founder, you always want to get everything done super quickly. But if you're in a regulated space, then obviously you also need to go deep, and you really need to understand all of the regulations, because otherwise this is something that can kill your company very quickly. And what surprised me like nothing else, especially here in Singapore, was the fast reply times and the clarity with which we've got access to officials that could advise us on how we should structure our customer flows and overall the company. And so very grateful that we came across first the Pro Enterprise Clinic in the first space, but then also later on built a relationship with the Pro Enterprise panel. So whenever we're launching new products that we think might touch some regulations, we're getting great advice there, and we're very happy for the option to get so much clarity as a startup when it comes to regulations in Singapore and beyond in Southeast Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that, Julian. I think that was nice for our audience to know how PEP has helped you in your case. Do we have any questions from anyone from the floor that you'd like to know more about the PEP program that Dana has just shared earlier, or maybe some questions to Julian during his process that PEP has also supported Zenyum on the road to launching to the market? Feel free to post your questions in the chat box that's provided there, of course, and we'll be happy to take on your questions. All right, and maybe I can kick off with a couple of questions from my end. Okay, maybe to the ladies from the PEP team. What kind of information do businesses need to submit to seek PEP support? And if you can cite some related examples as well.
Thanks, Christine, for the question. It really depends on what sort of support a business is seeking. If they are looking for support under the First Mover Framework, or FMF for short, then first and foremost, are there any identified plots of land that you have actually already identified as suitable for your business needs? Secondly, has there been any conversations with the relevant agencies regarding the particular plot of land that you're looking for? Thirdly, any utilities or special requirements for the piece of land? And of course, fourthly, definitely your proposal. When submitting a proposal, I think some of the things that you should really highlight would be what's so innovative or novel about your proposal. This is not just for PEP's benefit, but also for the agencies as well, to give them a little bit more reason to actually grant you the land for a prototype. So that's for the First Mover Framework. The other one that I have in mind is the New Idea Scheme, or NIS for short, that you heard about earlier on. For that, we would really urge businesses to come to us with a very specific regulation that is proving a hurdle to your business. I think often at times when businesses come to us and say that, oh, I have this particular broad act and there are like different sections under the act, time is wasted as we try and sieve through and pinpoint exactly which regulation or which part of the act that is a pain point for the business. And it's not just on PEP's end, but also on the regulatory agency. Especially for APEC Med, I guess for MOH and HSA, they have so many different departments and divisions, each taking care of a different area of work. So if you're able to really pinpoint on the regulation or specifically part of an act, that will be helpful to us. After pinpointing that particular regulation or part of the act, we need to know exactly how you intend to revise it. Are you going to proposing a tightening? Are you proposing a relaxation of it? Because again, that will then help us reach out to, for example, the Ministry of Law to see how then do we need to suspend or waive off certain legal obligations during a regulatory sandbox period. And of course, I think it's also helpful if you're able to submit what is the end outcome the business is gunning for out of this regulatory sandbox. So very broadly, these are some of the areas of information we'll be looking for under the first mover framework and the new idea scheme.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have a question from Ines to Julian, actually. How long did it take for you to register Zenyum with HSA? And did PEP speed up the process of the registration? Thank you.
I don't know if PEP did speed up the process of registration. What it did certainly is it facilitated the initial conversation. So it might have been that without the PEP, it would have taken me much longer to find the right person to talk to. So I cannot comment on that because I never went through the alternative process without the PEP. I found the process overall extremely fast and helpful. So from kind of registration to getting the right license done, usually what I mentioned before, you get an answer within 24 hours, and then you have certain processes within the agencies themselves that take a predefined time. What I found is that, for instance, HSA was always very clear. It's going to take 2 weeks. This is going to take 4 weeks, and so on. So very, very predefined. Maybe Dana can comment on that, but I don't think it's the intention of the PEP to speed up processes, but rather to point the business in the right direction and connect them immediately with the right person to speak to at the agency, so that you have clarity from the beginning. And that is certainly saving time instead if you ever, as a founder, have to do your research yourself.
Hi, Ines. If I may complement Julian's response, I think in terms of speeding up, it's not so much about speeding up the processes, it's more of time savings. If PEP is able to point a business in the right direction, who exactly in the whole of HSA or MOH, for example, to speak to. So instead of spending or wasting time going around in circles, not knowing which is the right division or department to go to, you can go straight to the right officer to kickstart the discussion. That's one area of time savings, especially for MedTech and for APEC members, I think, because it deals with medication or medical products or devices. I think we also need to be cognizant that HSA and MOH will have their safety concerns. So we need to actually balance safety concerns as well as supporting innovation in that way.
All right, thank you. Okay, and if I can also bounce this off to Dana and Rachel as well. How would I know if my concern or my challenge is something that PEP can help me with? And what kind of timeline would I expect for a turnaround?
To be honest, you will have to write into us first with a business proposal, because we first and foremost need to understand what exactly is the problem you're facing before we can actually advise whether or not this is supportable under PEP. I think very early on in my presentation, we did start it out to say that we very specifically look at regulations and regulatory obstacles. So if you're coming to us with things like grants, what we can do is to actually direct you to the right officer at ESG to have that conversation about grants. In terms of how long will the process take, it really depends on the complexity of the issue. Sometimes we realize that the issue is less about regulatory obstacles and more about clarifying what is the compliance to certain regulations. So that clearly would take a very short period of time. But if we're looking at something complicated that requires a regulatory sandbox, hashing out the parameters of the regulatory sandbox, talking to the Ministry of Law to waive off certain of legal obligations during the period, identifying partners and other businesses to involve in the sandbox, evaluating the outcome of sandbox by itself will take quite some time already. And it can be anywhere between as short as 3 months, if it's a very simple, very small sandbox, to something more than 6 months just to hash things out and to execute it. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. I think it's good that our audience is aware of and what to expect from the kind of support that PEP can help them, of course. I think it's related to the sandbox as well. How can I get clarity on regulations or support from agencies?
Yeah, thanks, Christine, for the question. Rachel here. I think in terms of understanding what regulations you face, it's definitely to know that for, I guess, for APEC members, the agency that will typically approach is MOH, HSA, and because, you know, when you're dealing with novel things such as devices and software, healthcare software, it would then concern IMDA for personal data protection privacy issues, right? So I think narrowing down which parent agencies you have to consult preliminary, that's the first step. Secondly, would advise to know what exactly is the keywords to your business proposal. So is it device, software, what kind of illness or disease are you actually curing? What's the problem statement here? I think having clarity on that will give you the kind of keywords to search under various parent agencies for any guidelines or any particular policies that can actually come up. So I think that will give you quite a good preliminary landscape in terms of whether there are any regulations that you should actually consider while crafting out your business proposal, or exactly what would you like to seek PEP's clarification or link up to with any particular regulators. Yeah, that's the advice.
And if I may add on to complement Rachel's answer, I think increasingly we're also seeing the different regulatory agencies develop their own sort of microsite or web app with different tools, for example, e-advisor tools, to actually help businesses along, guide them in identifying the appropriate regulations to help in their businesses. So I know, for example, for HSA, very recently, they have developed or enhanced their old sort of Form SG, sort of very simple form to guide businesses who are trying to sell supplements to actual medication. This web app actually has an e-advisor service to actually help businesses identify what category of complementary medicine they fall under, and then within that category, what are some of the regulations and the subcategories they need to be aware of. So I would really urge members of APEC Med to actually play around with the websites of MOH, HSA, NCID, for example, to actually familiarize yourself, especially for the startups, what are some of the regulations that you would need to be aware of?
Right, thank you. Actually, I think it's very relevant here because we do hear from our startup members that from time to time they do encounter quite a lot of issues with regulatory mainly. And I think you'll be a great source of support or guidance for them Even if you're not the direct help to go to, I'm sure you can point them to the relevant government agency or body to go to. Do we have any more questions from the floor? We are still happy to take on your questions. And I do have a last question actually for the PEP team. Does PEP only support established businesses?
Yeah, so to that question, thanks, Christine. I think we'd like to clarify that we actually do not discriminate between any business type. So you can be really budding, just an idea on a sketch pad, and you can come to PEP, right, a startup, or you can be a small, medium enterprise or even large corporations. We do help them with some of their regulatory issues, especially when you're pivoting your business model or trying to even venture into international markets and you're trying to understand what exactly is the standards, right? That are accepted and you want to clarify with HSA, for example. I think that's something that PEP can definitely help you at every stage of your growth. I think we are here to support you.
Okay, that's great to know. Actually, we have a question here from Dr. Manoj. Regulatory challenges on international transfer of personal information, PDPA, especially on DPO. The company is operating from different geographies in India. Any comment on that, the PEP team?
Yeah, sorry. So can I just clarify? Thanks, Dr. Manoj, for your question. I just wanted to clarify, are you referring to the information regulatory that is a bit different from India and Singapore that you would like to seek assistance on?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it would be great if you could actually write into us about what exactly is the information barrier that you're looking. Is it more of exportation of data sets, or is it more of just storage and software that you need assistance on in terms of importing? I think we'll be happy to clarify that with IMDA or MCCY, etc.
Good to know. Any more questions that we have, our team is here to help you, and this is the right platform for you to post your questions away and get direct answers. And meanwhile, if I can then turn my attention to Julian. Hey, Julian, what is your key takeaway from your experience with PEP? And what advice would you give to, I know you've spoken about it just now, and maybe what other advice would you give to the audience out there based on your experience with PEP?
At the landscape, so I think my key takeaway is the landscape is always a little bit more complex than you think as a founder in the first space, and you need to or it's really your job as a founder and as a business owner to understand the complete picture, especially in a regulated space. And you can only do so much by doing research by yourself. And this is why I think the PEP is an amazing tool to really lay out the entire universe of potential contacts, but also regulation that you need to effectively build your business and make sure that the products that you issue are safe, but are also fully in line with the intended regulation that exists in the markets here.
All right, great. And how can businesses start researching about some of the potential regulations? How did you do it? That they may face and need to overcome. I'm sure the road to starting out a business is never easy, like I said. So, what did you do? And maybe it's good to share your personal experience.
So the first thing is, and that really surprised me, there's a lot of really great information already online even by the likes of like an HSA or MOH. Actually, what they do have is, if you want to found a new business, for instance, there are certain flow charts that you can follow that ask you about your product, and where, based on giving answers, you already get some indication on under which regulation you would fall and what the kind of guidelines and guardrails are that you have to follow as a business. So the first point would be simply for me to say, go to the relevant government website and inform yourself. There's some great materials there. The second part then would be, once you have laid out a basic understanding, contact the PEP, right? And say very clearly, this is my idea, this is my understanding of the landscape. Who can I now speak to confirm all of that? It's usually much better if you come at least a little bit informed instead of just going there and saying, explain everything to me. So we found that a very good way with the regulators to engage with them and to say, look, we have read your papers, we have read the regulation, this is how we think you want this to be interpreted, and this is how we are accordingly building the business. Is this okay for you? And then the PEP can be the perfect translator in between that, to make sure that you have the right people sitting on the other end of the table that are giving you the okay for your company.
Great, good stuff. Hey, okay. Do we have further questions here? Otherwise, I would like to stress again for all our startup members and our corporate members or our associate members, where you think the Pro Enterprise panel team is able to support you in any of your regulatory challenges, or there, even operating spaces that you think that you have a novel idea to pitch to, stay in touch with the PEP team, and they should be happy to help you with some form of guidance or assistance there. And yeah, let me just take a quick look. And if we do not have further questions, then
sorry, Christine, if I may just very share the results of the activity that we do now.
Right.
Okay, we don't actually have a lot of responses, but we do see there seems to be some emphasis in terms of compliance to regulations and regulatory sandbox. So I'd like to urge those of you who are in this session today, if you feel like your proposal is something that you would like to discuss, having a regulation sandbox set up for, may we suggest that you submit the proposals, maybe say through Christine, to the PEP. Our thoughts is that if we do have sufficient bulk, maybe say 3 or 4 proposals, all seeking for a regulatory sandbox, and they are all innovative proposals, my suggestion then would be to actually involve the agencies like MOH and HSA to come up with a very specific clinic session with the 3 or 4 proposals that came in, and then let's have that very specific conversation about setting up a sandbox.
Right, thanks. Anything else to add there, Rachel, as well?
I guess in relation, I just wanted to conclude and really assure everyone that the government is here to work with you. Contrary to the myth of how the government is always rigid and not really, more like anti-innovative, right? Really, I think the PEP is a very good in between or conduit between the private and public to actually facilitate innovation in Singapore. And it's really up to you to really think out of the box, to think what should be the future of the Singapore's healthcare system or sector be like. So I look forward to receiving all of your proposals and speaking with everyone again in due time.
Sure. Actually, we have a last question that just popped up to the PEP team as well. Getting an understanding of the regulations and implementing them at Zenyum in the right way. Actually, maybe you'd like to clarify this question again. What exactly is the question that you are posing to the PEP team?
Can you see? Is this? I can't seem to share the Israel.
Right. Is there any way you can let's see. Okay, I'm wondering how long the overarching process took.
Sorry, I was on mute. So I think I can only reiterate that. The process will be always depending on whatever product you are registering for yourself. The one thing that I can say is I wrote to PEP, and within 24 hours, I had a reply in my inbox where I was able to set up a meeting. I had some pre-structured questions already. And I think there was a meeting the next week where there already then were participants of the HSA and of the MOH. I think one thing you need to be a little bit aware of is probably processes are going to take a little bit longer right now due to the COVID situation. Especially MOH, I can imagine, is obviously very, very focused on supporting there. But usually you can always receive a very, very fast reply, is at least my experience as a user of the PEP.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Julian. I think that helped a bit. Okay, and the PEP team has put up their contacts up there if you would like to submit any questions to them. So I urge you to take down the details there that you see on the screen. Right. I'll give you a bit of time there. And meanwhile, I would like to end off and conclude that APEC Med Startup Program strives to nurture medtech startups to drive innovation and to develop life-changing technologies in the entire medtech ecosystem. So look out for more exciting webinars coming up in the months and weeks to come. And meanwhile, I'd like to thank our panel of speakers today, Mr. Julian Artope, Ms. Dana He, and Ms. Rachel Chan, and all of you for your time and participation. So please take care, and we'll see you soon for our next webinar. And do have a great week ahead.
Thank you so much for the great support.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine.
Right.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.